Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for September of 2023. I've got 13 new albums that I spun over the last month that I'm going to be talking about in this video with time codes listed out in the description for each individual review. If you'd like to skip around, I did get one of the requests that I kind of had on the back burner for a little while tackled, along with some current stuff and a little bit of catch-up thrown in there for good measure. Leave it a like if you're excited and let's go ahead and get started.
But I'm still getting it done.
I walked away from the first Ghost of Vroom project, the sort of skeletal resurrection of soul-coughing energy by their frontman Mike Doughty with Andrew Livingston, wanting a full-fledged soul-coughing resurgence, because while it did scratch an itch to some degree that group has left in my heart since their disbandment, it still left me wanting a little bit more. And while that didn't come, and instead Mike and Andrew have been sort of continuing to harness some chemistry together on their second full-length outing, Ghost of Vroom 3, one of a handful of releases that dropped on September 1st, and the first that I decided to spend this month, still kind of leaves me feeling the same way. However, I will say that the components that feel like them adapting those sort of soul-coughing energy into a little more of a minimally driven avenue comes together a little more consistently on here. There's still some tracks that fall flat, but I think that by and large, their chemistry just feels all the more retooled and harnessed in a stronger facet. You know, the hooks on tracks like Pay the Man and Yesterday in California, I think hit so much harder and both blend the hip-hop inspired and some of the more pop-centric writing that was seen on records like El Also, just unified and brought into the modern age all the more splendorously. While you see some lyrical through lines from tracks like Pay the Man sort of expanded out more on tracks like As the Kid Goes for Broke, Slipping Off the Wrist, and I Had to Do It. While not necessarily always dazzling, I think out of all those tracks, I think Slipping Off the Wrist may be the best one. I still enjoy more the lyrical turns of phrase that crop up on there, and I don't feel like they necessarily go full-blown slacker rap in the same way that I was kind of criticizing Ghost of Vroom 1 for nailing a little bit too often outside of Slipping Off the Wrist. I like the groove of that song, I like the bass, and I feel like that component of that song is sort of indicative of the strengths that are seen on the album as a whole. It still gets a little too close to that kind of just where I feel like soul coughing never really got full-blown into, in the worst of ways. I also like that even though they still keep things a little more minimally driven, they still retain that more quirky sonic palette that I could see Mike Doughty still having an ear for, like on Your Bones in the Mud, which I also think has that sort of offbeat style of songwriting with a little more of a grim mask being put in the forefront. It kind of evokes that imagery of like the name Ghosts of Vroom would do. And while moments like the endings of tracks like Your Bones in the Mud and As the Kid Goes for Broke feel more like sprinkling outros to unify the record sort of thematically, I kind of wish those happened more often. There's some fun sample weaving and some quirky ideas outside of those tracks and some texturing that happens on tracks like Let Up that add to the quirkiness. I feel like those moments are washed out by some of the more milquetoast excursions that they still dive into on here. Like the fucking 2008 ass production on a track like As the Kid Goes for Broke, or a track like Rain Check Jones, which just feels like the most tepid version of what I like out of Mike Doughty's songwriting style. Plus, the fun, sort of repetitive songwriting style that fuels the closer of Stalagmite is fun to see Mike toy with again. This minimal atmosphere doesn't build to anything that I feel like has that ending song quality that I think that, again, he's just kind of done better earlier on in his career. I still like this. I still think that it is a solid-ass creative excursion for an artist that I like with a different artist that I think he works with very well, and I'm glad to see their relationship or their sort of musical chemistry finding a better harmony on this. I'm still left wanting at least a bit more by this project, and I feel like if you would like soul coughing, or if you've liked Mike Doty's stuff in the past, it's still got stuff that's going to hit those check marks for you, but you may also feel a little underwhelmed with it by the time the album's done. It's still decently produced. I think it's still got some good ideas, just needing a little more to the table, in my opinion. I'm giving this a 6, still really solid, just left me a little dry in some regards.
And when the light hits my face,
Field Medic making a sequel to his debut and using it as a sonic pivot point is a great idea, in my opinion, and I'm of two minds of its execution. I think that it does have some cool ideas that he does execute well in some regards, but some fall pretty flat, in my opinion. While I get what he's going for on They All Seem So Happy, and everything's been going so well, I also honestly think You Deserve Attention kind of feels like the glossing up of an attribute of his sound that I've loved for so long, and the ideas of like doing beat tapes with acoustic looping guitar. While he's known for that sort of bedroom style production and that intimate lo-fi touch, I think that a clean approach doesn't necessarily falter. It's more the tepid milquetoastness of the other tracks, like the ones I mentioned. They have that same lyrical atmosphere that I think Field Medic just does pretty well in all regards. I just don't like the approach, honestly. But the moments like the beat drop on The Look on Her Face Like a Reoccurring Dream, and the airy cleanness on Empty Arms just kind of stick the landing better, in my opinion, and let that emotional core still hit the listener really strongly. I also think the madness and more quirkier ideas on tracks like Scion and Without You I Have Nothing are pretty okay, if not a little repetitive in some regards. I get what he's trying to do on tracks like They All Seem So Happy and You Deserve Attention and Mass Market Paperback. I just think that sonically they fall flat, in my opinion. I think that the auto-tune touch on Mass Market Paperback doesn't have that kind of empty feeling that it feels like he's trying to do with the hook of that. And I just think that the utilization of the cleaner atmospheres on the other tracks like that, on the other tracks mentioned, just don't sound all that interesting. I think that he does do clean produced stuff on here pretty well. I honestly would love to see more of a track like I Want to Last. I think that the production on that and the sheen that that track is leaning into with the sort of reverbed acoustic jangle approach, I think works. And I think that he sounds great over that instrumental palette, honestly. You know, his deadpan delivery may sound a little jarring to some degree, but I think that it just fits. I don't know, for as much as I want to like this, I think that this more feels like a scattershot experiment that I'm hoping he does pull ideas from and sort of retools into maybe a new era for his music, but it definitely is sort of a hard pivot that stumbles in some regards more than it does stick the landing. And I think I'm going to give this a 5. Just because that emptiness and the moments on this that I think really don't work land as some of my favorite moments in his discography. I'm not counting the guy out. I don't think that this is necessarily a harbinger for a flop era approaching. Because I think that he could take some of these ideas and nurture them or flesh them out and churn out some really cool stuff that is sort of adaptive from his own brand of songwriting. Again, there's moments that shine, but I definitely feel like this has the wonkiest hit ratio in his discography.
there's no need to be scared. Nobody knows it's there.
Anytime Jeff Rosenstock drops anything, it is always a must spin, and Hellmode is an incredible justification as to why. It is a tight as hell, well-produced batch of tracks that continue this pillaging forth of Jeff Rosenstock's being the realest old head doing it, crafting a handful of tracks that balance the lines of frenzied chaos and alt-rock punk-infused glory. I love how the second track, Chaotic as Hell, interlude adjacent head, just continues the energy from Will Still You and carries it well into Liked You Better by just completely burying the listener in the madness. That same kind of intensity just rearing its head in the best way on the end of Future is Dumb, where it feels like Jeff is pulling you right here just to remind you that you are one of a quadrillion times infinity number of atoms in the galaxy, and it doesn't owe you anything. The life that you live is yours. What you get is what you put in and take away. And that intensity that carries the listener of that track does a great job to transition into the hazier, slower, soft living, and another highlight that just accents how phenomenal the sequencing on this project is. Which, to dissect from the madness a minute, I do enjoy how great Jeff just carries the listener into this dynamic as fuck album experience, because that stretch post Future is Dumb with Soft Living through Life Admin is just a good little nugget of incredible melody play, great hook writing, and some good acoustic balladry on top of that. I think that this is a textbook example of Jeff just continuing to prove why he's one of the GOATs in his lane. You guys know I like Jeff Rosenstock, maybe probably up to this point in the video, but I think that Hellmode is a phenomenal notch in his belt that I think does what I've enjoyed from records like No Dream and Worry, but adds just a little more madness on the top of it all that I think he harnesses all the more. And I think excels. I'm giving this a 9. I think this is his choice. Easily probably going to be one of my favorite albums of the year. I love this thing. Slowdive dropping an album to kick off September made perfect sense. It felt like the most essential time for them to drop something, and spinning it around this time of the year feels like the optimal time to do so, honestly. Not just because it is fall, but specifically because it is a late summer release. And while I do get rotations out of them more in the colder months of the year for some of their projects, like their 2017 comeback, which I absolutely adore. I think that it is an incredible showcasing of why they still got it. And while it took them longer than I would have liked to follow it up, the actual album, Everything is Alive, feels like an album nurtured. It feels like an album that, while leaning heavy into this minimal atmosphere, does so to create experiences that throw some interesting curveballs into the Slowdive sonic circus as it is, and what they do with those pivots are honestly pretty awesome. You know, the track Kisses might be one of my favorite singles of the year because it feels like the epitome of that late summer love song. You know, the padded synths, which the use of synths by and large on this project really stand out as the biggest risk with the highest reward yielded, in my opinion. Tracks like Kisses and the opener Shanty and some of the almost synthetic sounding percussion that coats Skin in the Game do for them what ruins some shoegaze bands. And while there's some tracks where the synth uses feel inconsequential given what some of the rest of the band is cooking, I honestly really like a handful of the results. You know, I think the leads on Chained to a Cloud help unify the track in a good way. As that song kind of evolves and washes over the listener with these guitar crashes and great drum breaks, that synth loop just keeps everything unified perfectly. I obviously like their uses on Kisses and think that they pair really well with especially the drum production on that track. And they're also obviously a huge driving component in the instrumental Prayer Remembered, which I think is this beautifully crafted track that both leans heavily into the minimalism, but creates a lot of good sounds within it. And overall, while it would have been cooler to see them dive even heavier into the style of synths that code a track like the Slab and transport parts of their sounds into the cosmos, I, by the by, think that this album is pretty damn good. I don't know if I like it quite as much as the self-titled album, and I don't think it's as good as, like, the classics, but I think it's still a really good notch in this band's belt, and again, feels like a really good late summer album to transition into the colder months, especially by the time the Slab comes in the track listing. If you keep spinning it around this time of year, it's going to feel like a nice blanket to coat you in. It's a really fantastic closer, and I really like, by the moments in here that just, again, meld those new ideas so harmoniously. I neglected to film a score for the Slowdive review, but I'm going to give a handful of closing thoughts. I appreciate a group like this who's written, like, in this world to deviate and experiment from some interesting roots. You know, the whole minimalism approach, I think, is tackled well, and I think that, like, a lot of the production choices help keep that minimalism, or at least some of those sparse ambient ideas sort of coded in a nice grit that I would expect from shoegaze. Like, the drum production especially helps in some instances. I feel like, as a whole, the tracks that I don't end up enjoying or don't think holistically work aren't due to that aspect of the record. Like, I love Anda Lucia Plays' songwriting, and I like the components of the track, but I think it's like the clumsiest sounding song on the record. And Skin of the Game is a great offshoot. Honestly, I love a lot of the ideas in that song, but I mean, compared to some of the other ideas on the record, I don't think it's as well put together. I think production-wise, though, that track is choice as fuck. But I'm giving this a 7. I just don't like it as much as the self-titled Comeback. I think that record is really fucking strong. I could see myself keeping a handful of this in my rotation, but it's an instance in their discography where, even though I think that by and large they've written classics, this is the one that I would say is just the most solid.
They fired me from a cannon. I did the triple Lindy that I landed. I started rocking simply.
While I've enjoyed Open Mike Eagle's start to the decade as a whole, I think he's dropped just consistently great shit with the very forward in messaging, but also just very felt therapeutic Anime Trauma and Divorce from 2020 into the more loose, really abstract, but well thought out two-piece of last year's component system with the auto reverse and this year's Another Triumph of Ghetto Engineering. Open Mike Eagle has, I feel like, successfully made a really cool listening experience with this project. It features a lot of the same creative team. You see Video Dave cropping up on here. You've got Quell Chris production. You got Still Rift lending some features. And overall, the same deeper conceptualizing throughout the track listing that was on the last record crops up on here. I really enjoy the autobiographical writing and the storytelling through stage building that continues to permeate throughout tracks like the opener, I Bled on the Stage at First Ave, or the Grand Prize Game on the Bozo Show. I also really love how We Should Have Made Out Other Ground a Thing sort of acts as a semi-liner notes. It's got a lot of name drops in it of dudes that he's worked with, but does so in a storytelling-esque manner that I think is just really fun, honestly, from a writing perspective. As somebody who really appreciates the bar spinning and construction that Mike puts into his verses, I really appreciate the overall idea of that song. I do feel like it kind of makes the track, Dave said these are the liner notes, kind of unnecessary, but the production on that track is good. And, you know, it is what it is. Again, if you're thinking of it as like a piece of a duology, it honestly is kind of nice, because it adds like a nice real roll credits moment as the sort of earlier track doesn't quite do that. And on a new rap festival called Falling Loud, which kind of like has some fun wordplay in there on top of the same stage setting imagery being showcased in that track. I like how BET's Rhapsody sort of does a good job at explaining the importance of Rhapsody through that same kind of songwriting. I don't know, I really appreciate this album a decent amount. Like, sure, on its own, I feel like it is a little bit lesser than its first half, but I do enjoy this second half a hell of a lot, and I think that marrying the two projects together creates a really cool experience. I think that what Mike does do on here, writing-wise, is still really fucking strong. I just like how Mike raps, and I think that he's a really interesting dude. I do love the posse cut on here as well, WFLD 32. It kind of matches the energy of BET's Rhapsody as far as, like, its production having a little more of, like, a retro tinge with that, like, synth choice. It also acts like a segment within, like, a broadcast for the people, honestly, with how the verses flow throughout each artist. While Mike's delivery is a little more direct and it kind of has, like, poignant topics, but it does so directly, the rest of the artists kind of add to the energy. Like, having Hannibal come right after him with this verse that is honestly fucking awesome, but also gets kind of funny, is a nice way to sort of shift the mood. And the beat switch in the middle of his verse is sick as hell. It's giving, like, Danny Brown on Cancer for Cure energy. Obviously, as a fellow Doom fan, I really appreciate this album closing out on a tribute to Doom, and I think that obviously, I mean, Mike's done it before, he's done tributes to Doom. He is also a huge MF Doom fan, and I think that he does good shit about the guy. I've loved Childworks beats he's done with Mike, and I feel like the sort of atmosphere on a new rap festival called Falling Loud is choice. Like I said, the liner notes tracks beat is good, even if the overall track itself feels kind of like weird on this solely in this album's track listing. I don't know, I appreciate the commitment to the bit, and the tracks around it are choice as hell still. And again, just the concept is really fucking cool, and I appreciate the depth in the writing and the artistry personally. Even if I feel like on its own it's definitely lesser, which is why I want to give it a 7. It is a cool piece of a duology in any regard. Both projects aren't too long, and it creates a really cool listen. Now, obviously, my love of a band like the Gorillaz opens up the door to liking other animated bands, and Brendan Small's Dethklok, which is the offspring from the Adult Swim show Metalocalypse that I liked watching when it had first started airing on Adult Swim back in the day, and I had bought the first couple of Death albums. I thought that they were just fun, extremist, death metal-ass death metal, a la, oddly enough, a band that I'm going to be talking about next month, Cannibal Corpse. Very just to-the-point metal that is brutal as fuck, but with its own kind of postmodern twist with some of its song topics and ways that it constructs its own brand of metal. There's extreme imagery to accent a lot of the very bold and brash production that had coded those first two records. And on this return, 11 years later, the Dethalbum IV, a sequel to an album I actually didn't spin. I didn't spin Dethalbum III when it came out back in 2012. I had it planned on doing so, but just never came across my plate. Oddly enough, I kind of hate its production more than I did the first two records. The second record was sort of showing a increasing quality in the production that more probably came from the budget given, but I think that they utilized that budget to make a sound that just worked better for what they were doing. This whole super clean shtick that is on the production of this, just I don't dig quite as much. That being said, the songs themselves, a lot of them I think are also just as good as I would have expected from this particular group, and the subject matter itself, actually, oddly enough, feels a little more thematically driven in some aspects, whether it be song titles or song subjects being themed around getting older and growing old, but in some comedic ways, like on Aortic Distortion, which just puts the end of life right into the listener's face. The opener, Gardener of Vengeance, is this song about being the tamer of grass in the most, like, exaggerated fashion. I also like that Mermaider gets its threequel, and I think that it is another gallop-filled, excellent track. I think that it's a great closer, too, because it's got this sort of encore-style feeling, or like a roll credit style, given it's a sort of payoff moment from parts of the band's past. That's actually a moment where I feel like all of the sonic components, production, and all kind of coalesce into a crowning moment as a whole. I think that it's a banger of a song that gets a really good lead-in from SOS in the track listing. It really takes me back in a lot of the best ways, and I think that those aspects of the lyrics definitely, I think, still work in the capacity of this band. If there is context to these songs, a la like new episodes or a new movie or something, I have none of that because I haven't watched it. But speaking on the music itself, I think that there's a lot of this that I think still works by and large. Yeah, from like a dissection perspective, there's components of this that feel very basic in its construction. Some of the chugging styles just feel very to the point, which in some regards one could say gives the comedic edge that these songs have a little more of a bland backdrop. But I think that by the by, Brendan still does his thing on here and creates some decent moments. Like, I really enjoy the sort of chorus of Mutilation on a Saturday night. The chaotic ass drums on there are killer as hell. And honestly, I like the boldness and a lot of the ideas of I Am the Beast, but that's a kind of crowning moment of where I think the production kind of sets the song back to a degree. You know, the guitars all have a lot going on in the mix, but there's some moments where certain attributes just feel kind of too buried in the mix or too covered by other elements going on. I mean, I know that it's a comedy record, so harping on the production may seem like a weird point to bring up, but when I can go back and listen to, especially Dethalbum IV, I think that the production on that is pretty damn solid. I at least like it more than the production on this. And I feel like it doesn't neuter the components of this that make it more of a compelling, heavier album to listen to. I know that fans are going to enjoy it. I still enjoy it as a fan of this. While when looking into the lyrics, I don't know the context of a song like Dead Face, I still think it's a pretty great song that has that brutalness cranked up to 11. While I know that it's not gonna be like among the crops of maybe my favorite metal albums of the year as a whole, I still think this is a really solid time. And as a longtime fan of this, or a former, like, more dedicated fan of this, to come back to it and see it still be a pretty fun outing, if not a little more bland sounding than the last time I checked in on them, I can at least walk away enjoying that. I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. It's really fucking solid. I feel like a retooling of some of the aspects could have made it shine a little more, but I think that it's still got some strong ideas woven throughout it.
I know it sounds fatal. I know we make fires. The end is real.
You know, when I had such meddling feelings about The Loneliest Time, I figured, given Carly Rae Jepsen's been on this sister album sort of saga, or at least a companion piece saga with her last couple of sessions, with Emotion having an EP dedicated, having its own full-length project that acted as another record for her, I figured The Loneliest Time would have a companion piece, and The Loveliest Time is that. It's here. Admittedly, I like it at least a chunk better than The Loneliest Time, and it's not because the overall sonic palette is all that different, because that's the beautiful thing about what Carly Rae has been doing with these companions, is I can at least appreciate the fact that throughout each of these records, she's just writing so many good bops with a good sort of lyrical through line that permeates throughout the tracks, that she can do stuff like this. Because one of the things that in hindsight I realized I didn't like about The Loneliest Time is its tone. You know, Carly Rae is not necessarily an artist that I would say strays from more melancholic ideas. There were some good expressions of that throughout the Dedicated saga. But I feel like the beauty of this sister record is that it plays to Carly Rae's strengths as an overall brighter sounding songwriter. She's always got this positive energy that permeates throughout a lot of her shining moments. You know, love is still a through line, but it's more about basking and celebrating that. And while there's moments where it dips into some avenues that, like, The Loneliest Time sort of swims around in, by I feel like she spends a lot more time celebrating love, or at least going to the extremes of being in love, in all of the great ways that she's done before. But with the sort of new disco-inspired palette that was toyed with on The Loneliest Time in its more brighter capacities. I like that gets to have more of a showcase, like the late album cut Come Over, which has that disco-rooted bass production with that tight groove that Carly just kind of dances over in a really good way. And if it's not getting in that upbeat, vibrant disco realm, it's at least laying in a funkier trajectory that, while still kind of something I'm adjusting to with Carly Rae, the production is so good that it helps her pop sheen gel with that energy a little better. You know, Aeroplanes is such a nice little groovy jam, and while Carly Rae's done like groovy adjacent tracks, it isn't in the realms that this dips in. Sort of breathy style of a hook. It lays in the realm of like where a track like I Want You in My Room sits, but doesn't even go as bold as that. It sits in this low-key realm, and I think that she, you know, hits a good harnessing of that, you know, energy with that track. Same with Collage, you know, the spoken word sort of staccato style almost flow that Carly Rae has on that track doesn't lean into her strengths as like a good melody writer, but I think that it embodies that, you know, that inspiration pretty truly, and I think that she does a decent job with it. And that's not to say she doesn't get to have moments where the hook really bursts out and grabs the listener by the ears and thrusts them into pure euphoria, as she has done in the past. The opener, Anything to Be With You, kind of has that energy presented right out front while the groove kind of settles in underneath. I think Kamikaze kind of tries to aim for those same stratospheres, and Psychedelic Switch, I feel like, kind of skirts that line with its rush into its chorus, and I think those moments help brighten up the track listing and kind of ground it in a realm that's adjacent to normalcy for Carly Rae Jepsen, that I think she melds with the rest of the ideas pretty harmoniously. Hell, Shy Boy's hook itself is a sort of adaptation on that bombast that I think Carly Rae also does pretty decently. I'll admit it's not my favorite hook on the project, but I think that her attempt at that style of chorus isn't really bad. I think that this is really solid. I feel like this would have been a better lead-in to this sound personally too, or maybe like sort of a retooling of that with some of the hits from Loneliest Time could have been a better, you know, first foot forward. And who knows, maybe I'll get inspired to do another Redacted melding these two worlds together. But I'll be honest, while they feel more like kindred spirits in a sort of full-fledged emotional sense than like the Dedicated projects, with this really leaning more into a lovelier time post a lonelier time in a way that's sort of like a mesmerized, hypnotized world, I did end up combining those records either, so this isn't really out of the realms of possibility. But as it stands, I'm giving this a higher score than Loneliest Time. I'm giving this a 7. I think that a lot of the ideas on here are strong, even if some don't necessarily fully work as an experiment. By the by, a lot of this does work, and it'd be interesting to see any sort of experiment or growth post this from her in this realm, honestly. Maybe even with a different type of producer that can lean into those influences even heavier. What's on here is still just a really good, solid-ass, pop-driven experience that I think Carly Rae uses her laurels in different ways that I think are interesting.
Could be the one who always could be forgiven by the conversations that
One of the things I was going to do in December, and I'm still going to do with one other choice release, was take parts of the Bomb Rush Cyberfunk soundtrack that came out this year and give them a little more of a deeper look. But I couldn't stay away from Swami's Back in the Day. Refuse is the theme for one of the characters in Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, and I loved every time it came in because it kind of switched up the vibe every time it did in the best way possible. I love the lead hook of that song, and I think that a lot of the melody play is catchy as hell, and I think that the production by and large is quality as fuck. It matches a lot of what I liked in the strengths of the Bomb Rush Cyberfunk soundtrack, and I gotta say, the full-length experience of Swami Sound is just as quality pretty much by and large. Even if there's maybe some songs that I think don't quite fully come together as well as others, there isn't a song without at least a moment that I think fucking rules. I love the way the mood is set on the opener Midnight Dominator, and I think that the beat switch up on there is impeccable. The production on it is just so damn good. Flows brilliantly into the title track, which is a track that has another more hook-driven melody that is also pretty damn infectious. I really like how this guy knows how he wants his tracks to sound production-wise, and I think that as far as capturing a vibe and a mood, this, by and large, has a really good sonic through line. Like the way the dancing synths come in on the backdrop of Favorite Song. Again, more of the vocal hooks on tracks like Hope It Says, and not necessarily Hollish Tor's front half, but its back half is fucking awesome. Again, a moment where those synths just come in and coat the mix in this richness that I fucking adore. Really, my biggest issue with this album is that I enjoy it by and large, but I just want more from this guy. And it's got some remixes on the end that I think are also pretty choice. And I like overall a lot of the aesthetics of this. But goddamn, do I just wish it were a bit longer. It's not necessarily like a real hindrance. It is with how little negative criticism I have to give it, but I'm definitely going to be perking my ears up for more of this DJ's output because I really like his production style. The synth choices, at least on this, just have a really good mood, and I feel like as far as, again, keeping a consistent tone throughout a nice little, both hook-driven and kinetic-driven electronic project, it just skirts those lines fantastically. I'm giving this an 8. It's a really strong fucking album. I think if you enjoy electronic music, you should spin 1000%.
They know me, but I think I'm keeping on the low. They know me everywhere I go. Soon as I step out the door.
Now, I spun this Tech 9 album specifically because there is a video dropping last month that required me to spin this in tandem with other spinning of this artist that I've been doing in the backdrop for a select months now. While I don't necessarily follow Tech 9 as closely, certainly as I used to, because he just became such an incredibly prolific artist, but I'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. Bliss, his newest album, comes at an interesting point in his career where he slowed down his output again and was dropping stuff that, by and large, was relatively solid. Sure, there were still some missteps in there, but it felt like he was sort of reining in his focus to some degree. Sure, there were still some moments where he was kind of just dropping odds and ends and kind of just keeping his name out there, but when he was like pulling together a record, it felt like intentionally constructed in a way that was at least thematically consistent. And while Bliss also kind of checks some of those boxes to some degree, I think that the finished product is kind of similar to, or highlights the aspects of his music I don't like as much. The album has this overall concept of like having this party in the sky while having these songs scattered throughout that kind of accent, similarly to other Tech projects like Something Else and Ever Ready, Tech's current state of mind or place that he's at in this point in his life. It's a sort of playbook that Tech 9 pulls from a hell of a lot. And I think it's just because at this point in Tech's life, yeah, he's doing some good stuff, maybe like business-wise, or at least he's in a transitional point in his business and is trying to experiment with that. But I don't necessarily like all of the output from this particular brand of what he's pulling together. A lot of the production on this reminds me of a lot of the ideas, or at least feels like in the same realm of Asinine, which is a Tech 9 album that I really didn't like whatsoever to a large degree, while having some continuing trends that Tech's kind of been toying with for a while now, just executed not well whatsoever. You know, tracks like Badge of Honor and They Know Me, and even Casey Huh, Casey What, even though it is a one of a handful of interesting posse cuts that coat this thing, just have that same kind of, I called it theme park rap in Asinine, but that same level of like sheen to the production that I think just takes this album and makes it sound all the more like just manufactured, glossed up, candy coated, you know, trash, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, and I know that it's got its fans, but it's a style of rap that I just kind of feel exhausted from by this point, because there's so much of it, and especially in Tech's case, he's sort of riding himself in circles in ways that just kind of don't excite me, you know? Sure, his flow play on those tracks is kind of fun because he's leaning more into flows that are cropping up nowadays, but like it leads to some hooks that are kind of clumsily written, / just kind of fall into the line of Tech hooks that I think are a bit too, like, are reaching a bit too hard to throw in that same catchphrase rap that dudes like E40 also champion, but not as strongly as he's accomplished in the past. Honestly, I think Ever Ready might be one of the best points of a comparison I can give to this, even if, you know, Ever Ready kind of channels the optimism that this kind of tries to aim for, or at least that what this record kind of tries to play off with its attitude towards, like, confrontation and haters, as it were. Which, I mean, when Tech's in this energy, sometimes he does drop some pretty decent-ass, hook-driven collaborations. See Wes Paul Bennett and Red Oro, which has a Queen Irby collaboration that I was kind of surprised to see, just because it's always interesting to see the circles Tech 9 will pull in with his collaborations nowadays. Case in point, the fact that Conway the Machine's on a track on here, Knock, another track that I think is pretty alright, and it's not just because Conway's on it, a rapper that I've gotten into within the last handful of years, but really enjoy the output of. Also, as somebody who liked Tech's music and his label roster throughout the early 2010s, I liked seeing him come together with Yubi on I Metamorph, which is an instance where the sort of turn of phrase style writing that Tech is trying to channel in here does work, similarly to Wes Paul Bennett. One aspect I think is interesting on this record, though, that I don't quite know how I feel about its inclusion, is that he closes it on this track that continues to play into the long-standing sort of statement that Tech 9 is forever underrated, that he doesn't get quite as many nods as he should, or doesn't have quite the notoriety as he should. But, like, I don't know that wholly checks in my opinion anymore. Dude's getting, like, nods from so many dudes. Tech's name is, like, a lot more common in the conversation than it used to be, especially. But, like, no, I think especially, like, 10 years later after the Wayne nod, night and day difference, in my opinion. Ultimately, because Tech Nine has such a consistently long and lengthy album process as far as like the layout and the overall thematics, there's always going to be a couple things that net positive. Similarly to other records in this discography that I don't like Planet or Asinine, this just has a hit ratio that I don't necessarily like as much as others that have been dropping recently. I'm gonna give it a 4 because sure, it's like super strange in ways that like I don't think Tech quite nails. Some of the tracks just ride some interesting lines and have some interesting ways of presenting ideas that I just don't think work. And again, some of those production ideas I think just fall super flat to me. My boy Brady Madison threw this new Tim Hecker album, No Highs, as a suggestion for me to cover in the listening logs. And I'm not a stranger to Tim Hecker's brand of ambient excellence, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert in it either. I do enjoy what I've spun of his collective discography, but I'm still shy of really sinking my teeth deep into the crevasses of it. However, I will say, and it's kind of fitting that on the day I'm filming this portion, the weather outside is particularly gloomy, but I feel like No Highs is a textbook example of what I appreciate about what Tim Hecker does in creating a tone and a mood and an ambient atmosphere that I think just excels in creating some real emptiness within the minimalism without sounding too devoid of anything in the vein of like personality or flashiness. A lot of the production styles keep this hollow feeling ambience all the more melancholic and atmospheric, while also throwing his own particular brand of scoring and just composition as a whole into the fray, with tracks like the 8-minute Lotus Light creating this cyclical, with this synth loop approach to its texturing that I think creates an ambience that puts the listener a little bit more on edge in a good way. A sort of feeling that comes back with some of the tracks like Monotony 2, which is a great collaboration with Colin Stetson. The way that Colin's playing keeps the sort of mood of sadness in the air while some tension sort of subtly permeates throughout the soundscape, I think is executed magnificently. You know, that same sort of building tension in a smaller vacuum being explored once more on the track on the 8-minute Anxiety, which follows a similar compositional approach, but changed a lot of the timbre and the overall synth choices lend to a different side of that same propulsive coin. All the while, the pad uses on tracks like Glizalia and Winter Cop just surround the listener in this cold air that I think rounds out a lot of that emotional tone and mood perfectly. It helps tracks that try to blend those two worlds in the softer ambient worlds, like the slide guitar-led synth suspension, feel all the more unified throughout some of the other, sonic texturing that crops up throughout this. As a whole, I think this is a strong ambient project by an artist that feels like just like a master in the field. I really enjoy this project, and I think that if you guys want a great ambient record in a time where ambient records feel all the more commonplace, I like that Tim Hecker steps to the plate and shows you how a true artist can pull together a full-fledged, great-sounding project in this lane. I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. I think that it is fucking choice, and I could see somebody who is like even more of an ambient music enthusiast loving the fuck out of this thing.
Best of us.
And the prospect of abandoning their long-standing tradition of naming their albums after colors. Baroness's Stone sees them at a point of evolution, and one that sees them embracing ideas that don't feel too out there, but still feel like bold direction shifts for a band that has gone through not only a whirlwind of lineup changes and inner band struggles and strifes, but are also bouncing back from a project that, while having some of that great song construction still in place, was absolutely one of the worst produced records in their career. Going the independent production route also lets each element of the band, I feel like, shine in ways that it may not have on Gold and Grey, while letting those experiments still sit in the forefront of the listener's ears and give them a taste of what a new direction for this band can sound like, all the while having an incredibly sequenced and well-constructed holistic experience on top of all of that. The way the band opens with this nice, slower burn before striking strong with the electrifying last word. A track that's filled with incredibly sludgy riffs, bass production that enhances that sludginess tenfold, and some great vocal harmonies in the mix. Shows the band still hungry and still gnashing at the teeth with some razor-sharp edge. There's moments in the track listing like the spoken word filled Beneath the Rose and more propulsive groove-centric choir that feel more in line with what bands like King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard were doing, like back in 2017 with some of their album construction, but in a very Baroness way that I think adds a lot to the overall atmosphere that the band are constructing on here. I like the slow intensity that builds throughout the penultimate track, Under the Wheel, and how it balances beautiful grandiosity with some real dirt and grit. Again, those vocal harmonies just sing and gel together beautifully. It's also nice that tracks like Anodyne and Magnolia's more straightforward rock-leaning moments showcase that while Baroness is in a point of transition, they aren't losing the expansions on their foundations that they've been forging on throughout all these years. Hell, even a track that I think is the weakest on here, Shine, still has some great musicianship across its 6.5-minute runtime. And by the time Bloom's acoustic air rolls in and casts the album out into the sunset, I think that it gives the listener this sense of resolve that I think ties this evolution together in a really nice tight bow. I would honestly compare this album to Purple as far as giving the listener a really good slice of what this band is capable of, while also acting as a transitional pivot point in their sounds. I really enjoy this thing a lot. I think that it's a strong, tight, 10-track experience that doesn't overstay its welcome and has some really fun, dazzling ideas throughout the mix. I'm giving this an 8. I think that it's incredibly strong. I think that it is super fucking sharp, and I like the production on here infinitely better than the production on Gold and Grey.
Nasty, they don't make them like me. Mask up, all black, like a poo shiesty. Swoop through, I'm like Detroit Red.
Nas just keeps the surprises coming. I should have assumed that when I thought Magic 2 was really cool, but maybe not as good as the rest of the Magic and other Hit Boy stuff for the most part, that I should have expected something better around the corner. And Magic 3 is certainly that. While it loses the doubling down and super focus on the Magic aesthetic, a thing that I thought was really charming about Magic 2, this shit is just so good. It almost feels like not just an end to the Magic series, because it does have some electrifying performances by Nas that match the energy from the other Magic projects, and it even has a sequel to one of the tracks from the first one in Speechless, and I think that that's a great sequel song. It also has the same kind of like structure. Like, it's loose on the features. It's only got a feature from Wayne on Never Die, and I think the two of them are pretty damn good on it. I think Wayne's been on a really good streak, honestly, with the features and stuff that I've seen him doing, and I think that him cropping up on here makes a lot of sense. And I like seeing the two work together. I like both rappers, and I think that while Nas definitely seems like he's just having a good time, Wayne does too in his own kind of way. But I also think this album does pay tribute to the King's Disease trilogy that Nas also did with Hit Boy, not just because it's mentioned a decent amount on here, like on the opener Fever, and on the closer 1-800 Nas Hit, which is just a song that feels like a roll credits, whole ending shebang for this six-peat that they've been doing, because this is the last record that they're doing together. It's also like a celebration of Nas's 50th birthday, which also feels in line with the King's Disease ideas and what those albums explore lyrically. Case in point as well, the Based on True Events 2 song, Twofer, the two-part story where Nas talks about how his relationship with this girl had kind of gone awry because of his involvement with his street life, and how that ended up leading to him killing somebody. And I mean, it has really good storytelling from him over this beat that just enhances his storytelling and flow incredibly. I love the production on here by and large. I think that similarly to sort of the components of some of the Magic songs, but also the King's Disease ideas by and large, is Jodeci Member, a song that kind of reflects and pays tribute to influence to Nas' Jodeci. And similarly to having a sequel to a song from Speechless, this also has a sequel to a song from the King's Disease era with Blue Bentley. Another great sequel that I think continues the themes of that track fantastically. I love this project. I think that it's just incredible. I mean, you guys know probably if you've watched the channel for a long time, I like Nas. I'm a big fan of his work. I think that he's dropped some of the best records and has had just an insane run. He's better than probably any other rapper in his era still making stuff. Nas's consistency is unmatched regardless. Nas doing this six-peat, 2 trilogies with the same producer, and just making it work thematically, having some choice beats behind it. Like, I know in a lot of these reviews I've mostly talked up Nas's just pen game because, again, he just does a lot of cool shit on these records. The beats in general are fucking great. I think that the beat flip or interpolation on the Speechless sequel is dope. I love the atmosphere and the lushness within Japanese soul bar. Again, the production on the Based on True Events tracks really enhances the story. It gets, dramatic in all the best ways. You can tell that their chemistry that they formed together over this time has just really created a cool dynamic. And I really appreciate a good rapper-producer combo, you know what I mean? I don't know. I love this a lot. I think this is a great fucking album. I'm giving this a 9. This is easily one of the best rap albums of the year. From me, are you surprised, though? And that's going to be this video. I know I didn't talk about Mitski. I planned on it, but this video, in tandem with things going on, just been a little chaotic, and I'll talk about in more. So I'm going to give myself some more time with this new Mitski and actually give you guys a decent review of it next time. But either way, thank you so much for watching. Have you spun any of these records? Let me know your thoughts on them and anything you'd like for me to check out in this segment in the comments down below. As the year starts to sort of come to a close here in the couple of months, I'm going to be doing a lot of catch-up while trying to get recommendations and backlog, while getting recommendations and newer things that pique my interest still steady in the rotation. But either way, thanks for watching. If you liked it, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. Thank you again so very much for watching. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have a good day's lives and situations, and I'll see you another day.